Well, hello everybody. We're here for another FCA webinar today on explaining El Nino and the current situation as we head into this year's spring and summer, possibly next year. Before we go further, I'd like to welcome Farmers for Climate Action would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we work. The traditional owners of the land and our guests and speakers are joining us from today, and we pay respects to elders past and present. And in my case today, I'm coming to you from Parramatta, which is on Durack country. So today, our first guest speaker talking about the El Nino event that we might experience later this year is Catherine Ganter. Now, Catherine is a senior climatologist at the Bureau of Meteorology. She has 15 years experience working in climate, and she's been involved in a range of work during her time with climate monitoring and prediction at the Bureau. Presently, she is working on seasonal prediction and assessing the state of the major Australian climate drivers such as El Nino. So I'll now hand over to Catherine to give us her talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for the introduction. Hello to everyone. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the current situation, long-range forecasts, as well as taking a bit of a closer look at what's going on in the tropical Pacific and El Nino. So firstly, let's take a look at rainfall for the last few months. Overall, Australia has been close to average, but it hides quite a bit of regional variation there. And the blues here show rainfall in the top 30%, with the reds in the bottom 30% of records back to 1900. We can see that western parts of the country and eastern parts of the country have been drier, while a broad band extending from the northwest down to the southeast has been wetter. And if we take a look at the breakdown by month, we can see quite a bit of variability too. There's no particular shift to anything El Nino-like yet, but possibly some hints. May broadly was a dry month with its second lowest on record nationally. And a cloud band in June brought decent falls to much of the northwest, central, and even into southeast Australia, as well as frontal systems across the south. But we can see that things remain dry in the east and west. In fact, closer to those really deep pinks in the east and west are pretty much the areas at the moment which have been highlighted in our drought statement. In terms of maximum temperatures and how they've been going, the yellowy oranges are warmer than average and like rainfall, that's the top 30%, and the blues show cooler than average days. So for April to June, temperatures overall were slightly above average. I'm going to just turn my video off because I'm being a bit jumpy. Hopefully that will improve. So for April to June, temperatures overall were slightly above average, and nationally 0.36 of a degree above average, so middle of the range. But in terms of notable statistics, Queensland was 6th highest. And if we look at the most recent month in the bottom left-hand side, we can see June had unusual warmth across Queensland. That darkest area is highest on record, actually. And if we look at the state as a whole, it came in with its warmest June since 1910, but also the NT came in as third warmest too. So it's quite a warm month, a warm winter month, with nationally 10th warmest for Australia. In terms of minimum temperatures, April to June was not quite as significant as with nights slightly below average overall, 0.35 of a degree below average for Australia. However, June brought warm nights to Victoria and Queensland, ranking equal 5th and 8th respectively. I must admit, being in Melbourne, it still felt cold, but you know, of course, it's relative to the time of year. If we take a look at soil moisture, we can see the big rain event at the end of June and into early July has influenced soil moisture for July to date, with broad swathes of the country having above average soil moisture. But we see below average soil moisture is still mostly present in Western WA and along the eastern seaboard. And just up there in the corner, we have the full month of June there. So we can see it has been relatively dry across the east there. In terms of water storages across the country, the shades of blue here show water storages above 70%. And of course, the lime green there as well indicates above 100%. So in terms of the water storages, we're currently in a relatively good position, with much of the country showing those blues or green colour. So let's take a closer look at our climate drivers. Now let's start with the El Nino likelihood, since it's so topical. Now, you may have heard that the World Met Organization, sorry Theo, I'm just giving a presentation. You may have heard that the World Met Organization, or WMO, has announced that El Nino conditions are here, and so have our US counterparts. However, we're still at El Nino alert, and so this essentially means we're close, with a number of key things present for an event. So I'll take you through how El Nino works and explain a bit about what's going on. So in a normal situation in the tropical Pacific, we have our easterly trade winds blowing from east to west, and warmer waters naturally build up in the Western Pacific near us. And that's where we get extra moisture and cloudiness and rainfall. And in the atmosphere, we see those winds traveling to the Western Pacific, and then they lift up. And once they've risen, they naturally flow back to the Eastern Pacific in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So this is just a normal situation. Now, during an El Nino, what we see is a weakening in the atmospheric circulation, and it shifts east, and sometimes the wind direction even reverses during an El Nino. We see warmer waters slosh back to the east, and this drags the rain and the cloud with it. And what we see develop is a positive feedback. So the changes in the ocean temperatures mean the rain and cloud follow those warmest waters, which in turn feeds back to the winds, and which affects the ocean temperatures. And it's this positive feedback loop, or you may have seen it called coupling, between the ocean and the atmosphere that helps set up the El Nino for months at a time. And it's a good source of predictability for our region. So when this is set up, we often see those effects that we're familiar with, you know, a drier winter spring for much of Eastern Australia, as well as warmer days for the southern 2/3 of Australia. And in addition to them, we also see things such as increased bushfire risk for the summer months, fewer tropical cyclones, a later start to northern Australian rains, more heat waves, and of course, with those drier conditions comes a longer frost risk season. However, these effects aren't necessarily guaranteed in exactly these locations, of course, and these are a guide to what's happened in the past. So in terms of what we're seeing for El Nino development, we can see here our El Nino box in amongst the global sea surface temperatures. And this is just the past week, for example, but just take a sit back and look at the globe. There's really quite a lot of warm water everywhere. Now, we have met our El Nino thresholds for the ocean. You can see it's warm, and the forecasts are indicating it's likely to get warmer, but it's also warmer right across the tropical Pacific, and this may mean it's finding that El Nino circulation harder to set up. Not that it won't, we think it's just that it's harder. And this is what we're seeing, that the atmosphere hasn't properly shifted yet. The Southern Oscillation Index, or SOI, was looking quite El Nino-like, but it's actually dipped back into the neutral range. And trade winds and cloudiness, our other atmospheric things that we look at, are mostly neutral. So this is why we're still at alert. We've met ocean thresholds, but not quite the atmosphere. So that coupling or connection hasn't quite happened yet. And you'll also have seen our rainfall patterns also don't look yet like we've entered El Nino. We've still got, many areas looking quite wet. Now, if we go back to what WMO was saying, the World Met Office, this is actually a statement we provide input into already. So it only talks about a weak connection so far with the atmosphere, but it anticipates it will connect in the coming months. So the summary overall is quite similar. There's also no single definitive index or measure for the El Nino Southern Oscillation. It's a complex system that describes those changes in the Pacific Ocean and atmosphere above it. So this is also one of the reasons why differences can occur. And in general, Met agencies have tailored their services around the impact of El Nino or La Nina for their country. So we consider our service best suited for Australia. So it's not just about El Nino, we're also possibly looking at the development of a positive Indian Ocean dipole. And for the agricultural sector, this is probably the more important driver. It affects many regions of the south during that key growing season time, bringing drier conditions to much of the south. And it's active during the winter spring months and then fades come early summer as the monsoon trough heads towards Australia. Sorry, I forgot a slide progression, but we can see here that what a positive Indian Ocean dipole looks like, with drier conditions across the south there for much of the key agricultural regions. Now, another thing that's affecting our climate, global warming, of course, continues to influence us and global climates. And global SSTs have been warmest on record, so that's since 1900 for each month since April. So that's April, May and June that have come in for their particular months as highest on record. And I've got here the June time series back to 1900s, just for a visual on how that looks. So that's the global sea surface temperatures there. So we haven't seen an El Nino develop with ocean temperatures broadly this warm. Some of the things we've understood how they operate in the past may not operate that way in the future. And so this is why we're keeping a really close eye on it. The other thing to bear in mind is that usually the year following an El Nino brings a spike in global mean temperatures. So if we look closer to home, Australia's climate has warmed by about 1.47 degrees since 1910. And that also leads to an increase in the frequency of extreme heat events. And we've also seen a rainfall reduction across southern Australia of about 10 to 20% in the cool season or April to October months. So we're dealing with a tougher situation overall. So this is, you know, a bit of a strange situation, and the best thing we can do is look at our climate models for the likely conditions for Australia. So yeah, let's look at the long range forecast, and this combines all our influences together and provides us with the best picture of the season ahead. Now, we're looking at our climate model, but international models are also broadly consistent with the likely conditions. So if we start with August, we've got here rainfall on the right. So those yellowy browns are indicating below median rainfall is likely, and greeny blues, of which there aren't really much, are indicating above median rainfall. For maximum and minimum temperature, the reds are indicating above median temperatures, and blues indicating below median or cooler temperatures. The map on the left is the maximum temperature, and pretty much all of the country is likely to have warmer August days, with that darkest red being greater than 80% chance. And we call that very likely when it's over 80%. If we take a look at August to October, we can see a very similar signal with warmer days and nights, and much of that area is in fact very likely. And rainfall too, below median rainfall is likely for broad parts of Australia. Sorry, the progression is quite slow at times. These are relatively new maps, so I'd like to point them out. We can look at the likelihood of more unusual conditions, so the chance of unusually wet or unusually dry. That unusually wet one's pretty, it's not really that interesting. So if we take a look at the one on the right, the chance of unusually dry conditions, and this specifically looks at the chance of falling in the bottom 20% of the historical range. So that's over 1981 to 2018. Now, to talk to the percentages just briefly, in any random year, the chance of falling in that bottom 20% is 20%. So if we say have a 40% chance of falling in that bottom 20%, that's double the normal chance. So you can see quite a broad area across the south, and parts of the east show that we have double the normal chance, or a 40% chance of falling in that unusually dry range. Okay, looking at temperatures, those were the ones that had the really high percentages of above median, and it's not a huge surprise to see these unusually warm maps based on that. We can see large parts of the country have 3 times the normal chance, or a 60% chance of having August to October days in that unusually warm range. So that's that sort of dark burnt orange colour. Okay, so let's have a look at stream flows. So with those dry areas in the east and west, as well as a continuation of that in the forecast, we can see that those orange low flows are likely across much of the east and parts of the southwest of the country, but we still have high flows likely for large parts of the south, which have also had some decent falls recently. So we're generally looking at warmer and drier conditions for much of the country in the coming months, and that's through multiple climate influences. But I was wanting to end on a slide of what that may mean for hazards. So in terms of bushfire in the short term, now this is based off the Fire Agency's summary, the AFAC outlook. We have an increased fire risk for Central Australia, parts of New South Wales, parts of northeast Queensland, and parts of far Northern Territory and WA. Now, they're going to be providing a spring update next month for what, and I think that one will be quite a key outlook. For drought, our watch areas are in southwest WA, southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales. Those are the areas most at risk or currently in drought. For frost, the dry outlook suggests increased frost risk for susceptible parts of inland southern Australia. And other hazards such as widespread flooding, coastal flooding, storms and dust, their risk is closer to average based on the conditions. Okay, lastly, I'd just like to give a quick plug to the projects that are going on in the ag sector. Our first one is for Climate Services for Agriculture, and its aim is to help every farm to understand its weather and climate trends, and it looks at historical data and projected outlooks, and it helps to identify long-term risks and opportunities at farm and commodity scale. So we have a prototype website which I'll drop in the chat if you would like to take a look. The image there on the right is an example of what's available, and our second project that's been going on is called Agri-Climate Outlooks. And this project is 1 year into a 4-year project that seeks to make weekly to seasonal outlook insights more useful and informative for producers. So that's by making the underpinning forecast model more accurate and reliable, making outlook products that are relevant to real high value decisions, making sure they're interpretable and clear. And it will also help advisors and agronomists to confidently and accurately use our content. So in other words, train the trainer. If you want to know more on that one, please email our agricultural team. Wonderful people to talk to if you haven't before. That's it from me.
Thank you, Catherine. That's very informative. Now, we've got a fair few questions coming in. What am I getting messages about now? No, that's fine. So we'll move right on. So we're a bit ahead of time, and we might get some more questions in at the end. The next speaker is Graeme Hand. Now, Graeme has worked as an industrial chemist and an international marketer, meat industry consultant, as well as a farm consultant with many family and corporate farmers. He has a special interest in working with farmers, helping to create profitable regenerative farm businesses which are enjoyable to work in. Graeme will take us through a holistic decision-making process so you can better prepare your farm for the coming El Nino. So over to you, Graeme.
Great, thanks, Peter. And I can see my screen's up. So yeah, so thanks to Farmers for Climate Action. I'm a fellow of FCA and have done the training and all that. So very interested in Farmers for Climate Action, just run my own training and consulting business. And down in Tasmania at the moment, working on a drought project, so through the Tasmanian Innovation Hub. This is, there's not a lot you can do in 10 minutes, but I thought I'd just quickly go through the way I'm thinking and what I'm seeing. So this is the graph of ABARES data. So I think it's really important that we start talking about this. So this is the gross farm, which is typically what you'll see presented in the media on Landline. Everyone quotes the gross value of farm production, but I think as farmers, we need to be thinking about the net value of farm production. So this little blip here is really quite out of the ordinary for the net value of farm production. And the forecast is that it's going to go crashing down again. So from about 18, 19 billion down to about 4.5 billion. So that's a massive drop. And I think we need to be aware of that. And also that debt continues to increase. So I'm always looking at these numbers and thinking that we need to talk about this, but it just isn't very sexy. And I see this gap, this declining terms of trade as being a really big issue. And that's driven by, excuse me, driven by risk and also by inputs. So we need to be aware of what's going on at that sort of Australia level and make sure that we're taking this into account. So when I got that 4.4 billion forecast for the drop in the net value of farm production, so what farmers are going to keep, I emailed and rang ABARES to see if I'd got the numbers wrong. But that was based on, they were assuming inputs would continue to rise and that we would get an El Nino. So just something to be really aware of. And the way I've been talking to farmers and the groups that I work with is to say it's like having a salary of 180,000 and going back to 44,000. It's not going to be easy to adjust. But as far as I know, I can't find anyone talking about it. So sorry, that highlight that area there. So where is the drop and what's this coming from? So I just took this off the Auctions Plus sort of newsletter that they do. So total farm production's predicted to fall, and the majority of that is coming from cropping. So cropping has inherently a much higher risk than all of the livestock and livestock products. So you just need to be really aware that if you're expanding your cropping enterprise at the moment, that it's at a high risk, and to be aware that there could be a significant drop in the gross value of that as well as the net value. Because I'm in Tasmania, I've been doing analysing a lot of the Tasmanian figures. So what I've got here is just a graph of the beef, sheep and dairy, and then below just the average profit per year. So how much total profit divided by the number of years from 1990 to 2022. And the numbers aren't pretty. So, so beef, below 4,000, all broad acre, but below 16, sheep, 24, and dairy 71,000. So they're not big numbers, and they don't support a lot of debt. So we need to be aware that debt's increasing at the same time that overall the average net profit for people is low. So how are you going to service that debt is a really big issue in my mind, especially if we go into El Nino. I use Tim Hutchings' work. He did his PhD on risk in agriculture, and there's some really good stuff on that. But it's really, we have to be careful about what are the profit drivers. There's a very low correlation between production and profit. Generally, most of the work you see is that that it's actually about controlling expenses is more important than maximising production, and also eliminating failures. So how do we get to that point that we eliminate failures? So I have a rather pessimistic view of the world, just so that you know where I sit. But I'm always trying to reduce failure and reduce expenses and risk for people, because that's why agriculture tends to struggle. These are the risks in agriculture and in order. So debt's the largest risk because it compounds down. Then seasonal, typically in Australia it's rainfall. I work around the world, and sort of, there's also the flooding and frosts and storms and hailstorms and stuff. So that's seasonal risk. And then the third one is market price risk. So I try to design and help people design for low debt in their business, low seasonal risk, and low cost of production, so that they always make a profit no matter what the market price is. So that's sort of the area that I think that we should be thinking about in terms of what's going to happen if we do go into El Nino and that the climate or the atmosphere starts to catch up with what we're seeing with the sea surface temperatures. I really like Gareth's no regret questions. I think that's a really key one. So this is, I've been using this ABARES dashboard, the farm data portal, because it saves me graphing all the numbers. So this is how debt's increasing per farm for all broadacre industries in Australia. So it's, it just continues to rise, and most of that debt is actually in the cropping, and the cropping's increasing at a much faster rate than all broadacre. So we just need to be aware of that. And I keep thinking that we've got to be a bit careful of debt, as it's the highest risk in agriculture. And also, when I'm being silly, I say I'm no accountant, but I don't understand how you can borrow money at, say, 7% and pay it back when you're only earning 2% return on it. So we need to be really aware of the what does that mean to actually put that business under more pressure. I look at these sort of things. So this is the rainfall anomaly for June, and I track those every month and send them out to the people that I'm working with. So this East Coast is already starting to dry out, and I'm talking to farmers here. The farm that I'm share farming beef cattle on is down near Bairnsdale, down in this region, and we're already picking up that it's starting to dry out and change. Possible actions, which is really what I think is the key for what we're going to do. So I use landscape function analysis. So David Tongway and Norm Hindley's work on, how do we reduce erosion? How do we increase water infiltration? And how do we increase nutrient cycling? And the focus that I have is that you've got to keep decomposing litter between the plants. So either between the perennial grass tussocks or between the crops. So all the truly regenerative farmers around the world have 100% ground cover comprised of decomposing litter between the plants that I work with. That allows them to lower their cost of production, reduce their seasonal risk, and sort of they have to work on other ways. So if you've got any low profitable animals at the moment, I'd be looking at how can I get out of them at a profit. So I'd be looking at selling. I know all the prices have crashed and stuff, but you need to maintain a plan. So the no regret decision is to sell all your least profitable. So if you're doing individual animal data, you can find that you can actually get out of you get rid of your least profitable and draft them off and get rid of them, but maintain a plan using that rainfall and anomaly to keep doing that. So if you're rotating animals, I focus on increasing the recovery times. That allows you to make sure that you join up the rainfalls and don't run out of grass. If you have too shorter recoveries between grazing events, then if the rainfall stops for a month or two, you run out of grass. I'd be postponing capital purchases and just putting them on hold just to see what happens. You don't want to be increasing debt in a time that your ability to repay it's dropping. And this is all assuming that we start to see more signs. I see that pattern of that East Coast lower rainfall, because typically we have a high rainfall gradient on our coast. I see that as being an early warning for me, but it hasn't actually happened yet. So you'd keep monitoring the monthly BOM data for your area. And then I'd be looking at if the spring's going to cut out, what are you going to do there? Are you going to reduce your crop inputs? It doesn't make a really big impact on your profitability, but yeah, you'd be looking at sort of what you can do for the how to take the risk out a bit of all that cropping changes, because that's really where the risk sits. So that's sort of what I'd be doing, looking at the land, looking at the plans, putting together those things, taking any of those other actions, postponing expenses and just continue to monitor at this stage. So that's all I had, Peter.
Well, thank you, Graeme. That was extremely well done in 10 minutes or less. An awful amount of, a very large amount of information covered there. We might have to get you back sometime to go into a deeper dive on some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Now I'd like to welcome Fiona Bess. Now, Fiona is returning to Birchip Cropping Group, apparently. Must have been there before. In November 2019 as CEO, after 9 years working in the education sector, teaching agriculture. In her position as CEO, Fiona works to bring relevant agricultural research and extension opportunities to the farming community by attracting investments to improve prosperity of broadacre farming locally, regionally and nationally. Fiona will talk to us through strategies BCG are looking at to make cropping operations more resilient in the drought. So thank you, Fiona.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the webinar today. As Pete said, I'm keen to talk about some of the work that the Birchip Cropping Group are doing and some of the research that we're using to support farmers in our part of the world. So for those of you who don't know much about BCG, we're a not-for-profit farming systems organisation based in the northwest of Victoria. And the mission of our organisation is to support the prosperity of Australian farmers, communities and landscapes through applied research and innovation. And we've been doing that for 31 years. Last year we celebrated our 30th anniversary, which was quite a milestone. We're an organisation that's managed by a farm board. We've got 22 staff. We have approximately 420 members of mixed cropping and livestock farmers, and we're advised by a number of committees, both farmers and researchers. And the graph on the map on the top right-hand corner provides a bit of a distribution understanding of where our members are. And so how we achieve our mission really is completed through, I guess, our broad scale work that we do. We work across, as I said, the northwest part of Victoria. And while I won't go through this list of research that we're undertaking, it provides a bit of a snapshot of the scale of work that we're doing. And those little pins that you can see indicate research sites across the Wimmera and the Mallee region of Victoria. And one other element that I wanted to draw your attention to is that the Birchip Cropping Group are a part of the Vic Hub, and we are the northwest node of the Drought Hub, and we operate in this part of the world where the number 4 is providing guidance and support in terms of drought preparedness within our farming communities. But just in terms of today's discussion, a couple of things that I wanted to point out is really a sequence of things that BCG are looking at working with our farmers on in terms of readiness for any climate situation that's faced. It's sort of a sequential program that we work through, looking at the practices that we undertake and how we're guided by research to have those practices informed. But one thing I wanted to, on Tuesday, I was thinking about this talk and I thought, well, what opportunities still exist for this season to capitalise on? And as Graeme said, you know, we've got a lot to manage in our systems. We need to manage opportunities and debts and all of those things. And I think capitalising on what this season still has to offer in our part of the world is something that we absolutely need to focus on. So on Tuesday, I jumped onto an app that BCG has developed. It's called Yield Profit Lite. It's free. Anybody can jump on and download it. And I thought I would, just to get a bit of a snapshot of what the opportunity looks like for this season, still, depending on whether things, you know, turn dry. So I jumped on. I said I was at the Birchip Post Office. I was growing a crop of wheat. I had 160 millimeters of soil water, and that included water that I'd had over summertime. And then I also put some soil nitrogen into the scenario. There was some nitrogen that we had accumulated over summer or retained over summer, and then we've got some applied. And so I put 120 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, and then I ran the scenario. And I think what is really important for today's discussion is that over on the left-hand side of that red square, you can see that decile 1, so if we have a decile 1 year from here on in with the current scenario that I put in, we've got a modelled opportunity to still achieve 2.7 tonnes per hectare here in Birchip. And so I think that is really important for farmers to consider, is that we've still got opportunity in this season that we really need to capitalise on. So I'd encourage farmers to have a look at that site if they're cropping, just to get a handle on what opportunities remain for this season. I also wanted to, I stole some information from Dale Gray, who's with Ag Victoria. He used a similar model to yield profit, but it's based on the old French and Schultz water use efficiency calculation. So at Berwick, which is a town just north of Birchip, using the French and Schultz equation, again, if we're looking at decile 1, we can see that even if we experience a decile 1 from August to October for the rest of this season, using that French and Schultz equation, we've still got the opportunity to achieve 2.3 tonnes per hectare of wheat, I should have said this is too. And moving just further south, same situation. So decile 1, this is at Minyip, so south of Birchip. In a decile 1 year, experience from here on in, we still have the opportunity to achieve 3.7 tonnes per hectare of wheat. So I feel like the point has been made that, given with, the potential forecasts of next year and potentially even the remainder of this year being dry, we've still got an opportunity to make some good decisions in relation to this year and our profits and our cash flow for the remainder of the year. But moving on, I guess it's once this season is over, then there's some other things in the cropping sector that we're focusing on and what research really backs us up on in terms of our decision making. So farmers in our part of the world, definitely stubble management is key. We need to retain stubble to ensure our soil cover, to maintain, soil protection. And that's been, I think, a move into zero till in the last 20 to 30 years has seen that occur, which is excellent. Also, summer weed control and moisture conservation over summer is absolutely vital for our cropping systems in terms of capitalising on opportunities for the following season. We have seen a shift in our increased summer rainfall over the last 20 years. And so capturing some of that out of season rainfall to be used for the crop the following year is really, really important. And what we have seen some farmers move towards is sensor weed control, where they're using technology like Weed It or Weed Seeker technology, where there's sensors on their boom sprays, where they're using less herbicide to spray out weeds on large scale paddocks. So I guess that, yeah, definitely in terms of what Graeme was saying, to reduce input costs is really important, and some of that technology is part of that story. But sitting alongside that is, I guess, management of our stubbles. A lot of our farmers do have livestock in the system, but we absolutely need to make sure that those stubbles are not overgrazed and that we've got really important, trigger points to move stock off paddocks to avoid the scenario that you can see down there in the right-hand corner. We've been there in the past and we don't really want to be there again. So BCG have been doing a huge amount of work in understanding what those trigger points are to move stock off stubble paddocks. But to do that, you either need to have a sale option ready, or you need to have the capacity to move stock into stock containment areas. And again, BCG has been doing a huge amount of work in stock containment, looking at not only the setup and structure and how you do it, but also the nutrition management of livestock in containment, as well as other animal husbandry activities like joining and lambing and all of those things in containment if you have to, if times are dry and you need to get stock off paddocks. Part of that story too, though, is having all of that feed on hand, understanding, the goals of the business around livestock and what you want to do. You absolutely need to have a strategy and a plan in place about how much feed you need to have on hand, what you want to do with the stock, whether you're going to sell some, whether you're going to have, you are going to try and retain either genetics or a core flock in containment, and how you're going to do that. And also that expands, out into the cropping side of the business too, in having seed on hand, making sure that you potentially have 2 years worth of stored seed, for cropping on hand. Nutrient budgeting, it's absolutely paramount that we understand what nutrients we've got in the soil. As Graeme has alluded to, the costs of production are increasing, so we need to make sure that we are absolutely efficient with our nutrient management. And part of that strategy is to do soil sampling, deep soil samples to understand what nutrients we have at depth, phosphorus sampling sort of in the top 10 centimetres, in order to help with input budgeting and ordering and things like that. One thing that we've seen a lot of farmers have started to include with their yield maps is protein mapping to support nitrogen input decisions. So I guess, again, it's arming yourself as a farmer with as much information that you can to make sure that your decisions are supported. And then another, I guess, the next step in the decision-making process, and what we've seen, with our research and farmer decisions, is looking for new varieties and varieties selection, looking at what's performed over the last few seasons. BCG are involved in the delivery of the national variety trials for all the cereal varieties, canola, and lots of the legumes as well. And so farmers are looking at introducing new genetics and maybe even some new crop types as well into their rotations. But, rotation decisions are driven by, how much moisture you can conserve over summer, and what nutrients you have in the soil, and again, what the budgets are allowing us to achieve profitably. Early sowing is a practice that we've seen increase over the last 10 years. We've got new varieties better adapted to dry sowing, which is obviously linked to early sowing, negating the risk of late breaks. Particularly, we've had a late break this year, but we've followed up with good June rainfall. But again, we've had lots of research in relation to early sowing, dry sowing. We're currently involved in research looking at new varieties with long coleoptiles, with CSIRO, and I guess the other element with dry sowing, which people always talk about, is managing frost risk at the end of the program. And we saw through Catherine's presentation that generally linked with drier conditions is increased frost risk. So we've done a huge amount of work in terms of managing our sowing window and managing our crop choice and type varieties to consider frost risk. And then I guess it comes down to the agronomic package in season. We do a lot of nutrition research and look at making sure that we making sure our systems have got the nutrients that they need. We do a huge amount of weed management research. Integrated weed management strategies are a really important part of that. Managing disease, and again, integrated disease management strategies are really, really important. Insect management, research, integrated pest management, a key part of our farming systems. And then I guess I've highlighted a frost plan at the back end of that, because as has been highlighted, frost, increased incidence, it's important to have a plan around what to look for. And if frost does occur at critical times, such as flowering, then we need to have some strategies in place as to what we're going to do, whether it's going to be fed to livestock, whether we're going to attempt to salvage it through hay production. and things like that. So I guess what I'm trying to highlight is that all the way through the growing season, there's decision points and new information, new triggers that farmers are using, and that BCG are supporting farmers to use to ensure that they're getting the agronomic package right, no matter what the season. And I guess I also wanted to talk about the financial strength of businesses. We need to make sure that our businesses are robust and that we do have a very good understanding of our financial situation and what risks we can take and what risks we can't take, and when we can take risks and when we shouldn't. And I think, it's already been alluded to, but having a really good understanding of debt structures and having plans around this, I think is key. One thing that we're spending a lot of time on is building, financial literacy and capability within farm businesses. And the other thing that we're also seeing a lot more of is the implementation of farm boards, and just to help with the communication on farm, help talk about, the farm's goals and visions, and making sure that they're shared with all of the people that are involved in the business. We feel that, in our experience talking to some of the farm businesses who have implemented farm boards, are really getting a lot out of it by being able to bring in external expertise to the business, being able to take some of the emotion out of it, and being quite pragmatic about some of the decisions that are getting made. And it's also allowing those in the farm businesses to, with a diversity of views, to be able to share what they're thinking and how they're feeling. And I think we've seen an improvement in on-farm communication, which is key, and particularly key when tough times occur and the business is going through, climatic stress. I think having some of these formal structures in place can really stand farm businesses in good stead. And succession is there at the bottom of that slide, but it's, I think we put a big emphasis on having succession strategies worked out and ongoing within businesses, not just a once-off discussion and then we think it's sorted. We've seen probably far more businesses go out of business through poor succession, more so than we have through drought and dry conditions. So I did want to make that point. People are a key part of getting through tough times, and we need to make sure that our farming communities are connected and they're really strong. BCG have started a young farmer network across the region where we've got local discussion groups where they've got an opportunity to talk about local issues, conduct on-farm trials, study trips and networking events. And we also recognise the importance of information. So making sure that we're getting the right information out to farmers at the right time about what they need. And I think that's absolutely key. And BCG have placed a strong emphasis on doing that. Two days on display there where I think that get out of a bog day last year, we had nearly 600 farmers at Warwick-Nabil turn up, which was absolutely phenomenal. And the day that's represented in the top photo is a cedar demonstration day that was held in April 2019 when we were comparing different cedar setups. So again, information when it's delivered in a timely and topical way is really important. And we try and do that right throughout the season through a whole host of different mechanisms that I've got listed there. So I think that's sort of, Peter, where I really wanted to finish that. I know I've sort of raced through, but I guess BCG really do see ourselves as a support mechanism for farmers in this part of the region. We share our results to other farmers across Australia. And again, it's about setting that business strength through a whole range of different ways, very holistic kind of view that we need to take. But thank you for the opportunity of sharing a little bit of a snapshot of what BCG does and what we're about.
Thank you, Fiona. Now we'll go straight into questions. Now, I've got the first one here for Catherine. With the long-term outlook, what is the long-term outlook for El Nino as a system if the oceans continue to warm under climate change projections?
I saw that one. It's a really good question. Now, the one thing I wasn't sure of is whether that was future El Nino. So I'll answer future El Nino. So ENSO is a naturally occurring climate driver. And we do have some insight from research of what global warming may mean for it. There's signs that, oh great, she's confirmed future El Ninos. Or sorry, I don't know if Leslie's male or female. During El Nino, we're likely to see heavier rainfall over central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean. So that's specifically for that region. And during La Nina, heavier rainfall in the Western Pacific and over the South Pacific. But what these exactly mean for Australia is unclear. But it does also suggest that with the influence of global warming, that there may be an increase in the frequency of very strong El Nino and La Nina events. So it is still very much the subject of current research at the moment. And we're also having a look to see whether we're having a look to see later, whether we can have a better indicator on our sea surface temperatures for El Nino likelihood.
Thanks, Catherine. Now, I have a question probably for Graeme, but it might be for whoever would like to answer it. Fiona might have a few words on it. Lots of questions about the impact of topsoil loss and damage of soils during El Nino. What can we do to make them more resilient?
Well, I'm happy to have a bit of a go. What we do is maintain what we call landscape function, which I talked about, that CSIRO research. So we're keeping the ground covered to keep the soil healthy. And we're finding that where people are doing that and keeping it covered and managing for that decomposing litter, that they're actually getting an improvement in the soil health over time. And then when it does rain, it actually recovers incredibly quickly. And I've got a lot of data on that coming out of the drought in New South Wales. So those people typically didn't have to feed through the next winter. But where people hadn't maintained ground cover, they had resowing as well as resowing pasture as well as having to feed through that winter. Thanks, Peter.
All right. Do you want to say anything on that, Fiona?
Yeah, look, I think just to back up Graeme, I think maintaining soil cover in our cropping systems through stubble retention is absolutely paramount. And we've seen huge amount of we've seen so much less loss of topsoil through that practice. So I think retaining stubble after harvest, and as I mentioned in the presentation, just making sure we're getting stock off paddocks as quickly as possible. As you know, as soon as we see that or before we see it becoming vulnerable, having those key trigger points, really, really important.
Very good. Now, I've got a question here, but I can't find it at the moment. But a person asked, what was the impact of El Nino in southwest WA as compared to the IOD? And as part of that question, another person has asked, does El Nino have any strength on wind? So maybe Catherine would like to pass a comment on those.
Sure. Now you're sounding a titch bit jumpy to me, Peter. Can you hear my audio okay?
Yeah, you're fine to me.
Okay, great. No, I just wanted to check before answering. So in terms of how El Nino affects the West, there is mostly it's through warmer temperatures. and it's to do with the way the wind flows. I don't know, I don't have at hand how it affects winds because we have a lot of trouble with long-term wind data sets, but there is definitely studies on how it affects the winds. I just don't have them at hand. But in terms of the southwest, the biggest connection with El Nino is when it couples up with the positive Indian Ocean dipole, because the drier conditions tend to spread further into WA when we have both of those climate drivers present. So if I were in southwest WA, I'd be keeping a close eye on both drivers for that reason. Did I miss any of that question, Peter?
Fine, thanks, Catherine. And we've gone past 1 o'clock, so Graeme will have to go in a minute. So I'll ask him a quick one at the end. Somebody wants to know what you know about heat stress in beef cattle, especially black cattle.
Yeah, I'm on quite a few forums around the world on heat stress, and it does tend to be an adaptation. So we go after that adaptation of the animals as much as anything, and there's not a lot of evidence. It's sort of like a bit of a belief that because they're black, they're going to absorb more heat, but they're incredibly well insulated. So you can have black cattle in very high hot tropical areas and they'll be out grazing, whereas, you know, white and red cattle are under the trees. So it's really an adaptation thing. And if we continue to get higher temperatures, I'd be selecting for those animals that are temperature adjusted. So yeah, so the colour's less important. So you know, we typically find I worked for AMH that JBS now owns, and the biggest problem was actually the feed type. So we didn't get deaths in paddocks, but we did get deaths in cattle on grain. So yeah, so I'd be more focusing on the nutrition and the water, worrying than about shade and shelter. I'm less inclined on that.
Okay, we might make this the last question. It's a broad general one on communities, so feel free, anybody that wants to jump in. But when working in regional communities, helping to prepare them for emergencies and disasters, what's the best way of introducing climate change discussion to those communities who aren't outwardly acknowledging it? We might start with Catherine for one of her, given that the bomb's probably with us quite a bit.
You know, it's funny. I wish. Do you know if we actually have capability of giving audio to the audience? Because I'm aware that we likely have one of our ag folks online, and they're probably better suited to answering that than me.
I don't think we can do it from here.
Well, what I might suggest is pass to Fiona and Graeme, and I might see if I can get an answer from them in the meantime.
Okay, Fiona, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, look, I think you know, BCG have been talking about managing climate, whether it be climate variability or climate change, for a really long time. So I think our audience and our farmers in this part of the world are really open to new research, open to science. And I think that's been a key part of what BCG has had to do, is to try and, you know, bridge the gap between, you know, the science and what's happening out in the paddocks. So I think we've got a really healthy relationship in our part of the world. But you know, it's taken 30 years of conversation and shared solutions, and I think we just need to keep having the proactive conversations about, you know, what we are doing in our communities, not just on our farms, but, you know, even in our smaller rural communities, through, you know, new recycling systems for sporting fields, you know, making sure we've got amazing green spaces for our communities to retreat to if things are pretty dire out in the paddocks. So I think, yeah, that community connection, we just have to keep the dialogue going.
Okay, Graeme, you get around to a lot of different people. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just keep thinking that we need to react with what's in front of ourselves. I don't think there's any, it's getting less and less confusion about it, sort of, with the heat waves and fires and stuff. So people just got to react to what's in front and adapt. So farmers are incredibly good at adapting, so yeah, I don't stress too much about whether they're arguing whether it's real or not real, as long as they're moving forward and adapting to what's in front of them. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward that things aren't heading in the right direction and we need to take some big steps. So yeah, I don't know. I don't sort of worry too much about it, Peter.
Not to worry. Did you get an answer, Catherine?
Not yet.
Not yet. No, well, we won't worry about that. But anyway, well, thanks for everybody for coming today. We'll wrap it up there. It's 10 minutes past. So I'd like to thank all the people that we couldn't actually talk to who came along to listen, and hopefully they got a lot out of it. Keep an eye out for our email that'll go out after this webinar to everybody who registered, so that they can get a recorded copy or find out when we're having more webinars. We will be having more webinars as we go through time on all sorts of topics. And thanks again for everybody for coming. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.